My name is Naomi, and I am 36 years old. As I stood before the entrance of that five-star hotel in downtown Atlanta, my heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. On either side of me stood two handsome young men just 10 years old, dressed in perfectly tailored gray suits. My sons, my pride, my everything. 10 years ago, I walked away from this world with nothing but a broken heart and two babies growing inside me. Today I came back to show them exactly what they lost. Before we begin this story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. If you believe in second chances and the power of rising from the ashes, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now, do you want to know what happened 10 years ago and why I was standing there that day, ready to shatter everything? Let me take you back to where it all began. Let me tell you about the girl I used to be, because she was so different from the woman I am today that sometimes I barely recognize her. I grew up in a small town in rural Georgia, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and opportunities were as scarce as rain in August. My father died in a workplace accident at a construction site when I was just 12 years old. He fell from scaffolding on a Tuesday morning and never came home. The company paid my mother a settlement that barely covered the funeral costs, and just like that, we were left with nothing. My mother, Ruth, was the strongest woman I have ever known. She worked as a seamstress at a local factory, stitching clothes for minimum wage while raising me and my younger brother Caleb on her own. We lived in a two-bedroom house with a leaky roof and a heater that only worked half the time. But my mother never complained. She just kept sewing, kept working, kept believing that education would be our way out. And it was, at least for me. I studied harder than anyone in my class, staying up late with textbooks while my classmates went to parties. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, I earned a full scholarship to study fashion design at a university in Atlanta. It felt like a miracle. It felt like my father was watching over me, opening doors I never thought possible. After 4 years of college, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a small fashion company in the city. The salary was modest, barely enough to cover rent and send money home to my mother, but I was grateful. I was building something. I had dreams of one day starting my own brand, creating clothes that would make ordinary women feel extraordinary. That was the girl I was at 26. Hopeful, hardworking, naive. I met Sterling Ashford at a fashion industry networking event where my company had a small booth. He walked in like he owned the place, which, as I would later learn, his family practically did. Sterling was 28 years old, tall, with dark hair and blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. He was the only son of the Ashford family, heirs to Ashford Holdings, a conglomerate that owned real estate, hotels, and financial institutions across the Southeast. I noticed him because everyone noticed him. But I never expected him to notice me. He stopped at our booth, looked at a dress I had helped design, and asked who was responsible for it. When my colleague pointed at me, he smiled and said he wanted to talk about a potential collaboration. I thought it was a business inquiry. I did not realize he was just looking for an excuse to get my number. The calls started the next day. Then the flowers. Then the dinners at restaurants I could never afford. Sterling pursued me with an intensity that was both flattering and terrifying. He showed up at my office with coffee. He sent a car to pick me up after work. He told me that I was different from every woman he had ever met, that I was real, in a world full of fake people. I resisted at first. I knew we came from different worlds. I knew his family would never accept a poor girl from rural Georgia. But Sterling was persistent, and more than that, he was convincing. He said to me once during a walk in Piedmont Park that he did not care where I came from. He only cared where we were going together. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. After 8 months of dating, Sterling proposed with a ring that cost more than everything I had ever owned combined. I said yes, because I loved him. I said yes, because I thought love was enough. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, because Sterling's mother, Cordelia Ashford, refused to host a grand celebration for what she called a disgraceful union. I met Cordelia for the first time a week before the wedding, and I knew immediately that she despised me. She was a tall, elegant woman in her late 50s with silver hair perfectly styled and a gaze that could freeze water. She came from old Southern money, the kind of family that traced their lineage back generations and measured worth in bloodlines rather than bank accounts. She looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. Sterling's father, Reginald Ashford, was quieter in his disapproval. He barely spoke to me, just nodded when introduced, and then spent the rest of our meetings looking at his phone. But his silence spoke volumes. I was not welcome in their world. Sterling promised me it would get better. He said his parents would come around once they saw how happy we were. He said he would always protect me. After we married, I moved into the Ashford family mansion on the outskirts of Atlanta. It was a house that looked like something from a magazine with marble floors and chandeliers, and more rooms than I could count. But it never felt like home. It felt like a museum where I was an unwelcome exhibit. At Sterling's request, I quit my job to focus on being his wife. He said I did not need to work, that he would take care of everything. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now I understand it was the first step in isolating me completely. Without a job, I had no income of my own. Without income, I had no independence. I spent my days alone in that enormous house while Sterling worked long hours at the company. Cordelia made it clear I was not welcome at her social events. The other wives in their circle looked at me with pity or contempt, sometimes both. But I endured it all because I believed in my marriage. I believed that love would conquer everything. 6 months after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. I was terrified and thrilled at the same time. A baby would change everything I thought. A grandchild would soften Cordelia's heart. Sterling would finally see that our family was complete. I bought a special gift box, wrapped the positive pregnancy test inside, and waited for Sterling to come home so I could share the news. When he walked through the door that evening, I handed him the box with tears of joy in my eyes. He opened it, looked at the test, and his face went pale. He did not say congratulations. He did not hug me. He just stared at that little stick like it was a death sentence. That night I went to bed alone while Sterling stayed in his study, making phone calls I could not hear. I told myself he was just surprised that he needed time to process the news. I had no idea that my pregnancy was not a blessing in his eyes. It was a problem to be eliminated. The morning after I told Sterling about the pregnancy, I woke up alone in our bedroom. His side of the bed was cold, and I found a note on his pillow saying he had left early for work. Nothing about the baby, nothing about us. I tried to stay positive. I reminded myself that some men need time to adjust to the idea of fatherhood. I called my mother to share the news, and she cried with happiness. At least someone was excited. But as the days passed, Sterling's coldness only deepened. He came home late every night, barely spoke to me during dinner, and slept in the guest room more often than in our bed. When I asked what was wrong, he said it was work stress. When I tried to talk about the baby, about names or nursery colors, he changed the subject. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. It was a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after I had discovered the pregnancy. Cordelia had summoned all of us to the formal dining room for what she called a family discussion. I thought perhaps she wanted to talk about the baby, maybe even show some sign of acceptance. I was wrong. We sat around that long mahogany table, Sterling on one side, his parents on the other, and me at the end like an afterthought. Cordelia waited until the servants had left the room before she spoke. She looked directly at me and said in a voice as cold as ice that she had some questions about my condition. I did not understand at first. I said yes, I was pregnant, about 8 weeks along. She smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator toying with prey. Then she asked if I was certain the child was Sterling's. I could not believe what I was hearing. I looked at Sterling, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother she was out of line. But he just sat there staring at his plate, saying nothing. I told Cordelia that of course the baby was Sterling's. He was my husband. He was the only man I had ever been with. She laughed a short, cruel sound. She said that girls like me always had stories, always had excuses. She said she knew what I was, a gold digger who had trapped her son into marriage and was now trying to secure my position with a pregnancy that might not even be legitimate. I stood up from the table, shaking with anger and hurt. I told her she had no right to speak to me that way. I told Sterling to say something to defend me. Sterling finally looked up. But instead of defending me, he said we should all calm down and that there would be plenty of time to sort things out after the baby was born. After a DNA test. A DNA test. My own husband wanted proof that his child was his. I ran from that dining room and locked myself in our bedroom. I cried until I had no tears left. When Sterling finally came to the door, he did not apologize. He just said his mother was protective and that I needed to understand her concerns. I should have left then. I should have packed my bags and gone home to my mother. But I was pregnant alone in a city where I had no friends and still foolishly in love with a man who did not deserve it. So I stayed. And things only got worse. A few weeks later, I had my first prenatal appointment. The doctor did an ultrasound and told me something that made my heart stop and then race with joy. Twins. I was carrying twins. I drove to Sterling's office to tell him in person. I thought maybe this news would finally break through his coldness. 2 babies. 2 miracles. The receptionist told me Sterling was in a meeting, but I said I would wait. After about 20 minutes, I decided to surprise him and walked toward his office. The door was slightly open. I could hear voices inside Sterling's and a woman's. They were laughing. I pushed the door wider and saw them. Sterling was standing by the window, his arms wrapped around a woman I had seen at company events. Her name was Gemma Thornton, 27 years old, daughter of one of Ashford Holdings' most important business partners. She was beautiful in a polished, perfect way with blonde hair and a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. They were not just talking. They were embracing. And the way he held her, the way he looked at her, told me everything I needed to know. Sterling saw me in the doorway. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or just annoyance at being caught. He did not push Gemma away. He did not apologize. He just said in that cold voice I was beginning to hate that I should go home and that we would talk later. I drove back to the mansion in a daze. I do not even remember the journey. All I could see was the image of my husband holding another woman, the same hands that had once held me with such tenderness now wrapped around someone else. When Sterling came home that night, I confronted him. I demanded to know what was going on with Gemma, how long it had been happening. He did not deny it. He did not even seem sorry. He said Gemma was his equal. She came from the right family, understood his world would be an asset to his career. He said marrying me had been a mistake, a moment of rebellion against his parents, that he now regretted. I reminded him that I was carrying his children, his twins. He shrugged and said there was no proof they were his. His mother's poison had seeped into him completely. 3 days later, I was summoned to the formal living room. When I arrived, Sterling was there with Cordelia Reginald and a man in a suit I did not recognize. Cordelia spoke first. She said the family had made a decision. The marriage was over. I would leave immediately and never contact Sterling again. I protested. I said I was pregnant with their grandchildren. I said I had rights. The man in the suit introduced himself as the family lawyer. He placed a document in front of me, a divorce agreement already drafted and ready for my signature. According to the terms, I would receive $50,000 and nothing else. No alimony, no property, no claim to any Ashford assets, and I would sign away any right to seek child support in the future. I refused. I said I would not sign something so unfair. That was when Sterling spoke. He looked at me with eyes that held no love, no warmth, no trace of the man who had once promised to protect me. And he said words I will never forget, as long as I live. He said, "Naomi, let me make this clear. You are nothing. You were nothing when I met you, and you will be nothing when you leave. You are just a poor girl who got lucky and your luck has run out. Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear. You are nothing." Those 3 words felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Cordelia added that if I refused to sign, the family would pursue legal action against me for fraud. They would claim I had deceived Sterling into marriage with lies about my background. They would ensure I never worked in Atlanta again. They would destroy me. I was 26 years old, pregnant with twins alone in a room full of people who hated me. I had no money of my own, no job, no lawyer. My mother was hours away in Georgia, barely making ends meet. What choice did I have? With shaking hands, I signed the divorce papers. I signed away my marriage, my dignity, and my hope. 2 hours later, I stood at a bus station with one small suitcase and a check for $50,000. My belly was just beginning to show. Inside me, two tiny hearts were beating, unaware that their father had just thrown them away like garbage. I made a promise to myself that day, standing alone in the cold. Someday, somehow, I would rise from this. And when I did, Sterling Ashford and his family would see exactly what they had discarded. The first year after leaving the Ashford mansion was the hardest of my life. I went home to Georgia, back to the small house where my mother still lived. She took one look at my face when I walked through the door and opened her arms without asking a single question. That was Ruth. She never judged, never criticized. She just loved. The $50,000 from the divorce settlement went quickly. I paid off my mother's mortgage, which had been hanging over her head for years. I covered her medical bills from a surgery she had needed but could not afford. By the time the babies came, I had less than $8,000 left. My pregnancy was difficult. Carrying twins put enormous strain on my body. I was constantly exhausted, constantly sick. The doctor put me on bed rest for the last 2 months, which meant I could not work at all. My brother Caleb, only 22 at the time, dropped out of community college to take a job at a warehouse so he could help support us. When I went into labor, it was 3 weeks early. Something went wrong during delivery and I hemorrhaged severely. The doctors performed an emergency cesarean section while I drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, my mother later told me my heart stopped for almost a minute. But I survived. And so did my boys. Jalen came first, followed by Marcus 2 minutes later. They were small, just under 5 pounds each, but they were perfect. When the nurse placed them in my arms for the first time, I cried so hard I could barely see their faces. These tiny humans were mine. They were all I had, and they were everything. The first months of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. I had trouble breastfeeding, so formula added to our expenses. The babies seemed to cry in shifts, ensuring that someone was always awake and needing attention. My mother helped as much as she could, but she was working full-time. Caleb helped when he came home from his shifts, but he was exhausted too. There were nights when I sat in the dark, holding both babies, wondering how I would survive. The postpartum depression hit me hard. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Some nights I had thoughts so dark I'm ashamed to admit them now. But every time I looked at Jalen and Marcus, I found a reason to keep going. They needed me. I could not give up. When the boys were about 6 months old, I started taking in sewing work. It was the only skill I had that I could use from home. I mended clothes for neighbors, altered dresses for women in town-hemmed pants, for men who needed them quickly. The money was pitiful sometimes, just a few dollars for hours of work, but it was something. As the boys grew, so did my determination. When they were 3 years old, I started selling clothes I designed myself on the internet. I had no budget for marketing, no fancy website, just a simple page where I posted pictures of dresses and blouses I had made in my mother's living room. The designs were simple but elegant clothes for working women who wanted to look put together without spending a fortune. I priced everything affordably because I knew what it was like to stretch every dollar. At first, sales were slow. A dress here, a blouse there. But then something unexpected happened. A small fashion blogger in Nashville bought one of my dresses, loved it, and posted about it on her social media. Her followers bought more. Then they told their friends. Within a month, I had more orders than I could handle alone. I hired 2 local women to help me sew, then 5 more. Then I rented a small workshop space in town. I named the company Ruth Designs after my mother, the woman who had taught me that hard work and love could overcome anything. By the time Jalen and Marcus turned 5, Ruth Designs had its own website and was shipping to customers across the country. By the time they were 7, we opened our first physical store in Atlanta, the city where I had once been thrown away like trash. By the time they were 9, the brand was carried in boutiques in 15 states. And now, at 10 years old, my boys had grown into remarkable young men. Jalen was thoughtful and studious with a gift for mathematics and a dream of becoming an engineer. Marcus was energetic and charming, talented at sports, and already talking about being a lawyer someday, so he could help people who could not help themselves. They looked so much like their father that sometimes it took my breath away. The same dark hair, the same blue eyes, the same strong jaw. But their hearts were nothing like his. They were kind, compassionate, and fiercely protective of the people they loved. I had never told them the full truth about Sterling. When they asked about their father, I simply said he was not able to be part of our lives. I did not want to fill them with hatred or bitterness. I wanted them to grow up knowing they were loved, not defined by someone else's failures. Last year, Forbes magazine named me one of their 30 under 40 entrepreneurs to watch. There was a photo shoot, an interview, an article that called me a self-made success story. I kept a copy of that magazine in my office, not out of vanity, but as a reminder. 10 years ago, a man had called me nothing. Now I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, the mother of 2 incredible children, and more successful than I had ever dared to dream. I thought I had left Sterling Ashford in the past. I thought our paths would never cross again. I was wrong. The envelope arrived at my office on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before the date that would change everything. It was gold and cream colored, the kind of expensive stationery that announced itself as important before you even opened it. My assistant brought it in with the rest of the mail, but something about it made me pause. The return address was Ashford Holdings. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation engraved on thick cardstock that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sterling Ashford and Gemma Thornton requested the pleasure of my company at their wedding ceremony. For a moment I could not breathe. Sterling was marrying Gemma, the woman he had cheated on me with, the woman who was apparently worth more to him than I or our children had ever been. But it was not the invitation itself that made my blood run cold. It was the handwritten note tucked inside in Sterling's familiar script. The note said, "Naomi, I hope you will attend and see what real happiness looks like. Consider it a chance to witness the difference between someone who belongs in my world and someone who never did." He was inviting me to be humiliated. After 10 years of silence, Sterling Ashford wanted to parade his perfect bride in front of me to show me that I was nothing compared to the woman he had chosen. I read that note 3 times, feeling the rage build inside me like a storm. My first instinct was to throw the invitation in the trash and forget it existed. Why give him the satisfaction? But then I thought about it more carefully. Sterling did not know what had happened to me in the past decade. He did not know about Ruth Designs. He did not know about my success. As far as he was concerned, I was still the poor, broken girl he had thrown away. He was expecting me to either stay away in shame or show up looking pathetic so he could feel superior. I called my best friend Amanda Pierce that evening. Amanda was a corporate lawyer. I had met at a business conference 5 years ago. She was one of the few people who knew my full history with the Ashfords. When I told her about the invitation, she was furious. She said I should not go, that it was obviously a trap, that Sterling was just trying to hurt me. But I had a different idea forming in my mind. I asked Amanda what she thought would happen if I showed up looking successful, powerful, and not at all broken. She paused for a moment. Then she laughed and said that would certainly ruin his day. That night I made my decision. I would go to the wedding, but not as a victim, as a victor. Over the next week, I hired a private investigator to gather information about Sterling's current situation. What I learned was fascinating. Sterling had become CEO of Ashford Holdings after his father Reginald passed away from a heart attack 4 years ago. Under his leadership, the company had struggled. Bad investments, failed expansions, and mounting debts had eroded the family fortune. Ashford Holdings was now in serious financial trouble. Gemma Thornton's family, on the other hand, owned a thriving technology company. The marriage was not just a love match. It was a business arrangement, a merger disguised as a wedding that would save Sterling's company from collapse. I also learned that Sterling had never had children with anyone. At 38 years old, he was still without an heir, which was apparently a source of great pressure from his extended family. The Ashford name needed to continue, and Sterling had failed to produce a successor. The irony was not lost on me. 10 years ago, he had thrown away twins who would have been his perfect heirs. Now he was desperate for the children he had rejected. But the most important thing I discovered was this: Sterling had no idea who I was now. Ruth Designs had been featured in magazines, on television, and newspapers, but Sterling apparently paid no attention to the fashion industry. He assumed I was still the same powerless girl he had destroyed a decade ago. He was about to receive the surprise of his life. 2 weeks before the wedding, I sat down with Jalen and Marcus to have the hardest conversation of my life. I told them the truth about their father. I told them about Sterling, about how we met, about our marriage, about how he had abandoned us before they were born. I told them about the divorce papers, about being called nothing, about walking away with nothing but them growing inside me. They listened in silence, their young faces showing emotions I had never seen before. Anger, hurt, confusion. Jalen asked why I had never told them before. I said I wanted to protect them. I did not want them growing up with hatred in their hearts. Marcus asked if their father knew they existed. I said he knew I was pregnant when he threw me out, but he had never tried to contact us, never tried to know them. Both boys were quiet for a long time. Then Jalen looked at me with eyes that were suddenly older than his 10 years. He said he wanted to meet his father. Not because he wanted a relationship with him, but because he wanted Sterling to see what he had missed. Marcus agreed. He said Sterling should know that they had grown up fine without him, that they did not need him, that they never would. I hugged them both so tightly, overwhelmed with pride at the young men they were becoming. We would go to the wedding together, not to cause a scene, but to speak a truth that had been buried for 10 years. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I designed a gown for myself, a stunning red dress that would make sure no one in that room could ignore me. For the boys, I had custom suits tailored in charcoal gray with red pocket squares to match my dress. Amanda would come with us for legal support, carrying documents that would be important later. On the morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had been broken and had rebuilt herself from nothing. I saw a mother who had sacrificed everything for her children. I saw a survivor. I looked at my sons standing beside me, tall and handsome and strong, and I knew we were ready. The wedding was held at the Grand Marquis Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in Atlanta. It was the kind of place where chandeliers dripped crystals and every surface gleamed with polished marble. The kind of place designed to make ordinary people feel small. I did not feel small. Jalen and Marcus flanked me as we approached the entrance, one on each side. They walked with their heads high, their shoulders back, looking every bit like the young princes they did not know they were supposed to be. The doorman checked our invitation and let us pass with a slight bow. As we entered the reception area, heads began to turn. I could see the questions forming on people's faces. Who was this woman in the striking red gown? Who were these handsome young men with her? Why did they look so familiar? A woman I recognized from Sterling's social circle 10 years ago approached us with a puzzled expression. She stared at me for a moment, then her eyes went wide. She said my name like a question. Naomi. I smiled and confirmed it was me. She looked at me up and down, taking in the designer dress, the diamond earrings, the confident posture. She clearly could not reconcile the woman before her with the timid girl she remembered. Then she looked at Jalen and Marcus, and I saw her face change. Recognition dawned. She saw what anyone would see if they looked closely enough. These boys looked exactly like Sterling Ashford. Before she could say anything, I excused myself and led my sons toward the main ballroom where the ceremony would take place. The room was breathtaking, filled with white flowers and golden accents. Hundreds of guests were seated in rows of elegant chairs, waiting for the bride to appear. At the front stood Sterling, looking older than I remembered, with gray beginning to show at his temples. Beside him was his best man, some business associate I did not recognize. Sterling had not seen me yet. He was facing forward, waiting for Gemma. I chose seats near the front, close enough that Sterling would definitely notice us when he turned around. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. The music began and everyone stood as Gemma entered. She looked beautiful in a traditional white gown, every inch the perfect society bride. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, smiling radiantly. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about love, commitment, partnership. I wondered if Sterling felt any irony hearing those words, given how he had treated his first marriage. Then came the moment. The officiant asked the traditional question. If anyone present knew of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, they should speak now or forever hold their peace. I stood up. The entire room seemed to gasp in unison. Every head turned toward me. Sterling's face went from confused to shocked to pale as death when he saw who had risen. I did not shout or make a dramatic accusation. I simply spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I said I did not object to the wedding, but I had something important to say, something the groom had kept hidden for 10 years. Sterling tried to interrupt, tried to tell me to sit down, but his voice came out strangled and weak. I walked toward the front of the room, Jalen and Marcus rising to follow me. As we approached, I could see Sterling's eyes darting between me and the boys, finally really seeing them. He saw his own face reflected back at him. Twice. I stopped a few feet from the altar, faced the crowd, and spoke. I said that 10 years ago I was married to Sterling Ashford. When I became pregnant with his children, he and his family called me nothing and forced me to leave with barely enough money to survive. He denied these children were his. He abandoned them before they were even born. I turned to face Sterling directly. I said, Sterling, I want you to meet Jalen and Marcus. They are your sons. The sons you threw away. The room erupted in chaos. Gemma screamed an actual scream of rage and disbelief. She turned to Sterling with fury in her eyes, demanding to know if this was true, demanding to know if he had lied to her for their entire relationship. Sterling stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Cordelia Ashford, seated in the front row, looked like she might faint. Her face had gone completely white, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. The guests were murmuring, some pulling out phones to record, others simply staring in shock. Gemma ripped off her veil and threw it at Sterling. She shouted that he had promised her there was nothing in his past, no secrets, no baggage. She shouted that he had wasted 10 years of her life for this humiliation. Her father, a stern man I recognized from the investigation as the head of Thornton Industries, rose from his seat. His face was red with anger. He announced loudly that the wedding was over and the business merger along with it. He would not align his family with liars. Sterling finally found his voice. He tried to claim this was all lies, that I was making things up, that these boys could be anyone's children. I was prepared for this. Amanda stepped forward holding a folder. Inside were DNA test results. I had kept a sample of Sterling's hair from years ago, something I had collected during our marriage without even knowing why. After the boys were born, I had ordered a test. The results were definitive. A 99.99% match. I handed copies to several people nearby, including a journalist I recognized from a local news outlet who happened to be covering the society wedding of the year. Sterling's denials died in his throat. Jalen stepped forward then, and I was so proud of the steadiness in his voice when he spoke. He said to Sterling that he was his son, but he did not need him. He said that his mother had raised them alone and had given them everything they needed. He said they came here not to ask for anything, but to make sure Sterling knew what he had lost. Marcus added that Sterling had called their mother nothing. But she had built an empire while Sterling's company was crumbling. So who was nothing now? The boys spoke with such dignity, such composure, that several women in the audience were visibly crying. Sterling stood alone at the altar, his bride gone, his business deal destroyed, his secrets exposed. His mother was being helped from the room by staff, apparently having some kind of medical episode. The guests were already filtering out, many of them making calls, already spreading the news. I took my son's hands in mine. I said to Sterling that I did not come here for revenge. I came so my sons could know their father saw them, even if he never acknowledged them. I came so the world would know the truth. And I came to show you that the girl you called nothing has become everything you will never be. We walked out of that ballroom with our heads high, leaving Sterling Ashford in the ruins of his own making. The aftermath of the wedding made headlines across the state. Within hours, videos from the ceremony were all over social media. News outlets picked up the story. By the next morning, the Ashford scandal was trending nationwide. Articles detailed Sterling's secret first marriage, the abandoned twin sons, the dramatic confrontation at his wedding. Ashford Holdings stock dropped by 20% in the first week. Investors fled, partners withdrew, and the company that Sterling's father had built over decades began to crumble. The Thorntons cut all ties with the Ashford family. Gemma gave interviews describing how Sterling had lied to her for 10 years, promising her a future built on deception. She filed a civil lawsuit for emotional damages, claiming he had wasted the best years of her life. 3 days after the failed wedding, Sterling called me. I considered not answering, but I was curious what he could possibly say. His voice sounded tired, defeated. He said he wanted to meet the boys. He said he had been wrong, terribly wrong, and he wanted a chance to know his sons. I asked him if he remembered what he had called me 10 years ago. If he remembered throwing me out when I was pregnant, threatening to destroy me if I did not sign those papers. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said he had been young and stupid, influenced by his mother, trapped by his family's expectations. He said he was sorry. I told him that sorry did not erase a decade of absence. It did not make up for the nights I cried alone, for the years of struggle, for everything our sons had missed because he chose not to be there. He asked what he could do to make it right. I said he could start by acknowledging his legal responsibilities. For 10 years, he had paid nothing in child support, despite being legally the father of 2 children. Amanda had already prepared documentation. Sterling owed significant back payments. He agreed without argument. The fight had gone out of him. I also told him that if he wanted any relationship with Jalen and Marcus, that would be their decision, not mine, and not his. When they were ready, if they ever were ready, they could choose to know him. But he would not be allowed to force his way into their lives or disrupt the stability they had earned. He agreed to that too. The legal process took several months. Sterling paid $2 million in back child support, a sum calculated based on his income and assets over the past decade. He also signed documents relinquishing any parental rights as I had requested. He would not contest custody or try to claim the boys as Ashford heirs unless they chose to accept that role themselves. The money went into trust funds for Jalen and Marcus for their education and their futures. I did not need Sterling's money. I had built my own fortune. But my sons deserved what was rightfully theirs. As for Ashford Holdings, it did not survive the scandal intact. Within 6 months, Sterling was removed as CEO by the board of directors. The company was forced to sell off most of its assets to pay debts and settle lawsuits. The great Ashford empire built over generations was reduced to a fraction of its former glory. Cordelia Ashford passed away 4 months after the wedding, her heart finally giving out. I did not attend the funeral. Whatever she had suffered at the end, I could not find it in myself to mourn the woman who had once called my unborn children illegitimate. Sterling faded from public view. Last I heard, he was living in a modest apartment working as a consultant for a small firm, a far cry from the CEO lifestyle he had once enjoyed. Some people said he was a broken man. Others said he got exactly what he deserved. I tried not to think about him at all, but there was one more chapter to close. 6 months after the scandal, I received a message from Gemma Thornton. She wanted to meet. I was hesitant at first, but something in her words seemed genuine, so I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe far from the media and the gossip. Gemma looked different than she had at the wedding. Softer somehow. Less polished, but more real. She apologized to me. She said she had not known about me or the children when she and Sterling began their relationship. She said that if she had known, she would never have stayed with him. She said she was sorry for her role in my pain, even if it was unknowing. I told her I did not blame her. We had both been deceived by the same man, just in different ways. We talked for almost 2 hours that day. By the end, we were not quite friends, but we had reached an understanding. 2 women who had been used by the same man, both now free. Gemma remarried a year later to a kind man who treated her well. I was happy for her, and I found my own peace too. It has been 2 years now since that day at the wedding. My boys are 12 years old, growing taller and smarter every day. Jalen is excelling in his advanced math classes, already talking about which engineering programs he wants to apply to in the future. Marcus made captain of his school soccer team and has started volunteering at a legal aid clinic on weekends inspired by the lawyers who helped our family. Ruth Designs has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We opened our first international showroom in Paris last spring. The company now employs over 200 people, many of them women from difficult backgrounds who just needed someone to give them a chance. My mother Ruth is 68 now, healthy and happy, living in the beautiful house I built for her on the same land where we once struggled to keep the heat on. She spends her days gardening and spoiling her grandchildren. Seeing her at peace after all those years of hardship is one of my greatest joys. My brother Caleb got married last year. His wife is wonderful and they have a baby daughter. I am the proudest aunt in the world. As for me, I have slowly learned to open my heart again. His name is Adrian. He is an architect, a widower with a daughter named Sophie, who is 8 years old. We met at a charity event for children's education, and I was struck by his kindness, his gentleness, his genuine interest in who I was, rather than what I had achieved. We have been dating for about a year now. It is slow and careful, nothing like the whirlwind romance that led me to Sterling. Adrian knows my whole story. He has met my sons and they adore him. Sophie and the boys have become like siblings. I do not know what the future holds for us, but for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid of love. Sterling wrote letters to Jalen and Marcus several times over the past 2 years. The boys read them, discussed them together, and ultimately decided they were not ready for a relationship with him. Maybe someday they will change their minds. That is their choice to make. I will support whatever they decide. Looking back on everything I have learned, some lessons that I want to share. The first lesson is that what does not break you truly does make you stronger. The pain I experienced 10 years ago nearly destroyed me, but it also forged me into someone capable of building an empire while raising 2 children alone. I would not wish that suffering on anyone, but I am grateful for the strength it gave me. The second lesson is that success is the best response to those who doubt you. I never set out to prove anything to Sterling or his family, but by living well, by thriving instead of merely surviving, I showed them and myself that their rejection did not define my worth. My children do not need a father who abandoned them. They have a mother who would move mountains for them. The third lesson is that children do not need perfection. They need presence. Jalen and Marcus grew up without wealth for most of their early years. They did not have fancy toys or private schools or expensive vacations, but they had a mother who was there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every triumph and failure. And they grew up whole. The fourth lesson is that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I have worked hard to release my anger toward Sterling. Holding on to bitterness would only poison my own life. But forgiving him does not mean pretending what he did was acceptable. It means choosing not to let his actions control my happiness anymore. 10 years ago, a man looked me in the eyes and told me I was nothing. Today, I can say with complete certainty that I am everything. I am a mother who raised two incredible sons against all odds. I am a daughter who made her mother proud. I am a business owner who built something meaningful from nothing. I am a survivor who found joy after tragedy. And I am a woman who learned that her worth was never determined by anyone else. Not by a man, not by his family, not by society. Only by herself. If you are watching this, and you have been told that you are nothing, that you do not matter, that you will never succeed, I want you to know something. They are wrong. You have more strength inside you than you know. You have the power to rebuild, to rise to become something they never expected. It will not be easy. There will be days when you want to give up. But if you keep going, if you keep believing in yourself, you will look back someday and realize that their rejection was just the beginning of your success story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been told you were not good enough? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you, please give it a like so others can find it too. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss any of our stories about women who refuse to be defeated. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I wish you courage when you feel weak, hope when you feel lost, and the knowledge that no matter what anyone says, you are never nothing. You are everything. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.